I'm embarrassed to show you this, but these are most of the glasses that I ruined getting engravings like that and that before I finally figured out the key to getting really nice engravings like this and this. And as you may know, if you're running a diode laser like the Xtool D1 Pro 10 watt that I'm running right now, then you need to do some sort of surface prep, because otherwise the laser beam is just going to pass straight through the glass and not leave any type of mark. So long story short, what you have to do is paint the glass with some sort of paint to allow the laser to stop on the surface of the glass, heat up that glass, and create tiny little microfractures in order to give you that nice frosted look. However, I learned the hard way that not all paints are created equal for this purpose. And I spent several days in many ill-fated glasses trying to get that nice white frosted look. And I did sort of get a frosted look, but with a gray or dark muddy color like you see here, which is definitely not what we want. And trust me, I went deep down the rabbit hole on research online, looking at a bunch of YouTube videos, forums, and other places online, and I saw a lot of people having success with black tempera paint for this coating purpose. And if you don't know already, tempera paint is just a popular craft paint that's sold in a lot of stores like Dollar Tree, Walmart, and a bunch of other retailers. But here's the problem. While everyone else seemed to be getting these nice white engravings, I was getting these dark, nasty gray engravings using black tempera paint like everyone else. I ran a truly dizzying number of power and speed tests. I tried applying the paint in different strengths, like diluting it partially with water. I tried dipping it to get the application done in that way. I tried applying it with a foam brush, but nothing seemed to work to allow me to get the frosted white look consistently that I wanted to get. So then I put my problem solving hat on, and since I had done so many different power and speed tests, I decided that the problem had to be something to do with either the paint or the glass itself. So I went to the Dollar Tree and I bought a different brand of black tempera paint than what I had been using before, and I bought a bunch of new glasses. I tested one of the new glasses with the new Prang branded black tempera paint, and it worked. But just to be sure, I also wanted to test the new paint with the old glass, just to confirm that it wasn't actually the glass that was the problem in the first place. And this also worked, giving me those nice white frosty engravings that I was looking for. And so this confirmed that the problem was the paint. And to my surprise, the brand of black tempera paint actually seems to matter a ton more than what you may have seen elsewhere online. In fact, I also accidentally discovered that using white colored Prang branded tempera paint also worked to give me those nice white frosted engravings. And so it seems like the actual brand of tempera paint actually matters a lot more than the color itself. So that is something that I really wish I had known in advance, and it wasn't something I had seen in any of my reading or researching online before actually testing it myself. And because I know you're probably wondering, the brand of paint that did not work for me is this Saks brand black tempera paint. So the Prang worked, and this did not. And to be clear about what actually made this paint work, I tried a few different ways of applying it to the glasses. I tried applying it full strength with a foam brush and just brushing it on in that way. I also tried diluting it 50-50 with water and then dipping the glasses into the paint. I tried one coat and multiple coats undiluted with the foam brush, but regardless of how I applied it, it all seemed to give me pretty similar results. And I was pretty surprised by this because I heard and saw a lot of people talking about how important it is to get a nice even coat. And of course, it is ideal to get a nice and even coat. But in my experience doing these tests, it really didn't seem to make nearly as big a difference as just getting the right brand of paint. So if I was trying to give advice to somebody starting over and trying to use this from scratch, I would probably say, yeah, don't worry about trying to do the airbrush to get things really nice and consistent, which I know a lot of people like to do. Don't worry about that. Just try dipping it or using a foam brush. Just keep it simple. But very importantly, get the right brand of paint. But once you do have a good paint for coating your glasses, there's really two other things that you've got to get dialed in, or you might end up with like chipping glass on your engravings or just generally sloppy engraves. So let's cover those two things next. The second thing we've really got to dial in is the power and speed settings, because we need to find that sweet spot where we're getting this nice frosted engrave consistently without going so far down the power and speed settings that we're getting flaky or even broken glass. And on the other end of the spectrum, we want to make sure we're not going so weak that we're just shaving off the paint and not actually making any markings on the glass itself. So personally, with my 10 watt Xtool D1 Pro here, my favorite settings for this were 1000 millimeters per minute and 100% power. But if I was starting over with a 10-watt diode laser I hadn't set up for this already, I would probably do a test grid that looks something like this, going from 800 millimeters per minute to 1200 millimeters per minute, and then on the power setting, 60% all the way up to 100%. And I've said it before, but it is really important to do your own testing for this sort of thing, because just because it works for my laser doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for yours. And I think that is especially true of glass, because glass is the single material where I've seen the largest variation so far in the differences between what people are using and recommending, even with the same wattage of laser. And if you have a hard time with these power speed test grids, I have made a video on my channel before that goes pretty deep on them, so you can go and find that. I'll link to it in the description if you want to find it there. Once we have our power and speed settings dialed in, then the third thing that I did to get good results with my engravings is make some modifications in the cut setting editors. So to access that, you just go to the layer, so you can see over here, and you just double click on it, and then you get your cut settings editor here. And so once we're in here, there's a couple of things that we want to tweak. So we already have our power and speed settings in here. And then for an engraving, if we're just doing text or a vector, which would just be something like you would create with the shapes directly in Lightburn, that would be one example of a vector, then we're going to use the fill mode. And then the next thing to look at is, I won't talk much about this, but I'm using an overscanning of 2.5%. And then for line interval, and again, I'm using a 10-watt D1 Pro here, I'm using a line interval of 0.08. And if you want to figure out in more detail how you find the ideal line interval for your laser, then I made a video that talks about that in depth, and I'll put a link card to the end of this video that talks more about that so that you can click over there and find out more info if you want to. But anyway, for my laser and for this type of engrave, I found that 0.08 line interval works the best for me, and I'm using 1 pass. And personally, that is all that I would be changing here to get a good text engrave on my glasses. But let's say you're doing something like a logo that's just 2 colors, so it's basically black and white, but you want to engrave it on glass. Well, that's going to be really similar to what we just did for the text. But there's one key difference, and that is that your logo will probably come into Lightburn as an image. There's other ways of doing it. You could trace it to get a vector, but let's just say for illustration, you're getting it in here as an image. Maybe you drag it in as a PNG or a JPEG file, and then you have this logo here. So then what you can do is open this up by doing the same thing, just going to layers and double clicking on it. And then what we get here is pretty much the same settings. We've got the power and speed here. We'll notice that the mode, instead of allowing us to change to like fill or line, is just set to image. And then I have my overscan the same, the line interval is the same, but it just automatically changed it to 0.799 for some reason. But anyway, it's 0.08 a line interval here again. But here what I want to change actually is just switching the image mode to threshold. So that's what I've been using to get like the logo engraved that I've showed in this video. That's the image mode I'm using here. And then everything else is basically the same. But now let's say you want to get a little bit fancy and you want to try a photo engraving on glass. That requires a little bit of extra work, but only a few settings have to change compared to what we've done already. So I'm just going to take this photo here. And by the way, this photo is a stock photo that I got from Unsplash. And so I'll put a link and author credit to that in the description of this video. But at any rate, I'm going to open that up just by double clicking like we have with the others so far. And I'm going to make a couple changes. So the speed and power, I'm leaving the same. I'm not changing that at all. I've gotten pretty good results personally with doing it that way. But what I do need to do next is check this little negative image box. And if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense to do this, because let's say you're printing something on paper and using black ink. Well, usually you would just be putting the black on and leaving the white spaces with no ink, right? Or if you're doing an engraving on wood, say you're doing like a birch light colored wood and you're making a dark engraving, what you're engraving is the black and the white space you're leaving with no engraving, right? And so we're basically doing the opposite of that on glass. We're actually making white marks, and so we need to leave the black space blank in order for the image to make sense. And that's why we're doing the negative image checkbox here. I've left my overscanning to 2.5%, but I have changed my line interval, and that's because I've done some testing on this, and I've just found better results personally with my setup doing a 0.07 line interval when it comes to doing photos. I've also used a very important setting here for photo engraving, which is the dot width correction. And I have it set here, you can see, with the checkbox on. It's usually off by default, I think, but I've turned it on and then I've put in a value of 0.048. This is the result of some testing that I did, and it's basically 70%, 69%, I think, if you want to be more precise, of my line interval. And the last thing here on this screen is I'm just going to set the image mode to dither. And the number of passes is 1, so I'm just going to click OK. And if I were engraving this image for the first time, I would probably take this and just run a small section of the photo as a test. And depending on how it looks, then I might come into an additional menu to do some more settings. And so depending on what things look like, you might want to come down here, right click on the image and go to Adjust Image. And then there's a bunch of stuff you can play with. And you can see this is what it looks like when we have it set to negative image, which is what we have in this case. And then you can play with the contrast, the brightness, and the gamma to try to get things to look a little bit better when it comes to the engraving. So you may or may not have to do this. It just depends on the exact photo that you're working with. And it's a little bit of art and science combined here. But I know I've covered a lot of ground quickly here, and if any of these things went over your head with photo engraving, then don't worry, I actually made a more in-depth video that talks more about how to test your line interval, how to test your dot width correction, and things of that nature. So if you want some of those questions answered, then I would recommend going over here, checking out that video, and I'll see you over there. Bye now.